Are you interested in building or strengthening your relationship with God but aren't sure where to start? Well, that's what we're going to address on this episode of the Give and Go. Let's go.
Hey, praise
The
the
Give and Go, where we give you the word in a concise package for all my people on the go.
What you say? Let's get it in. Let's get it in, big dog.
People say to me all the time, Rev, I want to start or I want to strengthen my relationship with God, but I don't have a clue about where to begin. That's what I want to address in this episode and the following two. We're going to put together a 3-part series on Discipleship 101. For all of those who are starting to start a brand new relationship with God or just want to strengthen our relationship with God. And for me, this episode is called First Things First because I believe that there are a few things that you have to know from the very beginning of this pursuit with God. And so this episode is First Things First, and we're going to look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 through 6 to get us started. Let me read that to you now. It says, now faith is the confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancestors were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of all of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. That's the New Living Translation. All right, so the first point I have today is that faith must be our foundation. That comes from verses 1 through 3. It says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Or the King James Version says it a different way. We'll get to that. Verse 2 says, this is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Now, these verses highlight the importance of faith for the disciples. So my question, of course, is what is faith? How do we define faith? Now, when I was growing up, the churchy answer was this. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That's right out of the Bible, Hebrews 11 and 1. But let me give you a working definition for us. Faith is an informed belief that moves us to action, even without all of the evidence in front of us. It is the ability to perceive something, even without processing all of the proof. Huh, good God Almighty. Now, based on the text, faith empowers us in at least 3 ways. What are those 3 ways? 1, by faith, we understand the work of God as creator. Number 2, we understand the limitations of what we see. And 3, we can please God through our faith. So I have a couple of questions for you before we go into point 2. The first question is, what informs your faith? What fuels your belief in God and in the saving power of Jesus Christ, even in the face of not having all of the facts? All right, point number 2, the faith of our foreparents can fuel us. The faith of our foreparents can fuel us. Let's look again at verse 4 and 5. It says, by faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. Now, the writer lifts up 2 ancestors from the Jews' history to deepen the audience's understanding of the power of faith. Abel's story we can find in Genesis chapter 4, and Enoch's story we can find in Genesis 5, verse 22 through 24. So what do we learn from these 2 forefathers in the faith? Well, from Abel we learn that when we have faith to give God the offering that he requires, the first and the fat, we are counted as righteous, and our works speak long after we're able to speak for ourselves. And from Enoch, we learn that it requires faith to walk with God, and that we are rewarded by never tasting death. That's everlasting life, and we'll talk about that in subsequent episodes. So here are two of my things. These are some heroes from the Jewish community and the Jewish community's faith. These are some foreparents, Enoch and Abel. When I think of my own faith has been blessed by praying and believing grandparents like my grandmother Roberta or my grandfather Samuel, even my own parents and those who are in my life who believed in God. And by watching their faith and what it did for them in their own lives, it influenced my own faith and my own belief in God by being able to see what God did in the life of somebody else. So here's my question for point number 2. Who are the foreparents in your life that have helped you develop your faith? And what have you learned from them and from watching their journey with God? All right, and so our last point for this give and go is that discipleship comes with some must-haves. That's from verse number 6. It says, and without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. This is another translation. But without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. The author outlines 3 must-haves in regards to our faith as disciples. Number 1, faith is required to please God. Number 2, we have to first believe that God exists. And number 3, we have to believe that God will reward us if we diligently seek after God's plan and God's presence. Listen, we have to believe in the existence of God. And in our day and age, that can be troubling. And there are many things that are barriers to young people and believers of all kinds in believing in the existence of God. Some of the crazy stuff that we see going on in the world. But this writer says, in order for you to please the Lord, in order for you to build on that foundation of faith, it starts with believing that God exists, that God is real, that God is real. And not only that, but that if you seek after God, that God will reward that for your diligence. So here's your homework for today. I need you to consider these questions. And the first one is, have you ever been in a season where your faith has been tested? What was going on? Have you ever questioned the existence of God? And what were some of the barriers to your belief in God? And number 3, how have you gotten through those barriers so that your faith was the foundation that allowed you to please God? All right, so let's wrap this up. Point number 1, faith must be our foundation. That's first. It must be our foundation. Point number 2, the faith of our foreparents can fuel us. We can look at those who've come before us in the faith to help build our relationship with God in our own faith. And point number 3, that discipleship comes with some must-haves. First of all, faith is required to please God. Number 2, we have to first believe that God exists, that God is real, and we have to believe that God will reward us if we diligently seek after God's plan and God's presence. Here is what I want you to do. If you have been blessed or encouraged by this episode of The Give and Go, I want you to share it with somebody, and I need you to subscribe to the page on the subscribe button below. But we also want to hear from you as we begin to build our plan for the coming year. We want to know what topics you have, what questions that you want us to address here on The Give and Go. So you can hit us up in the comment section right below, the comment section of this page, or you can hit me on social media at Josh in Pursuit on Twitter and on Instagram with your questions, and we'll find a way to integrate them into an upcoming episode of The Give and Go. This is your boy, Reverend Josh. This is another episode of The Give and Go. We hope to see you next time. Peace.